So one of the things that I get asked quite often when I'm running a workshop to show people how to make chocolate is, what is the difference between cacao and cocoa? It's actually a really confusing subject because the two words have been used interchangeably, and there's a whole history behind that. So I just thought I'd make a video just to dispel some of that confusion. Hopefully, I'm going to try to anyway, by actually talking about the whole process of making cacao and cocoa ingredients. So first of all, we're going to reel it right back to nature, and I want you to meet the Theobroma cacao tree. This is where it all starts. So we've got a tree called the Theobroma cacao tree, where cacao gets its name from. The cacao tree grows in subtropical and tropical regions, and it produces these gorgeous big pods that might be purple, red, yellow or green that produce about 20 to 40 cacao beans. So what is cocoa? Now, a good many years ago, when the raw foods movement got really excited about making raw chocolate, somebody decided that raw chocolate making ingredients were called cacao. So we get cacao butter, and we get cacao powder, we get cacao nibs, and we get cacao liquor. They decided that if it's roasted or chemically processed, it's called cocoa. Okay, so what I want to do is reel back to the 1600s when cacao beans started to travel the world. French and Spanish languages like to call the cacao bean still to this day, but apparently in the 1600s, perhaps due to linguistic issues or miscommunication, English-speaking people started to call the cacao bean the cocoa bean. So I just want to say a really important thing: the cacao bean and the cocoa bean is exactly the same thing. And we fast forward to the modern day, what it's called really depends on who you speak to, which country you're in, which brand you're looking at. But I just want to stress that the cacao bean and the cocoa bean is actually exactly the same thing. The raw food movement might say that the cacao bean is raw and the cocoa bean is roasted and processed in a different way. That's just subject to interpretation. So let's look at what you actually get from the cacao bean. There's three main ingredients that you might get from the cacao bean. You get something called cacao or cocoa liquor, or cocoa or cacao mass. You get cacao or cocoa powder. You also get cacao or cocoa butter. So let's look at how we take a cacao bean and turn it into these chocolate making ingredients. So first of all, you take the cacao pod and then you crack it open. You take out the cacao beans and you ferment them. Once they've been fermented, you dry them. Ideally, you sun dry them. Once they've been sun dried, then you roast them. Of course, unless you don't want to roast them and you just want a raw bean. So we'll put the raw beans to the side, and then we'll roast the ones that we want to roast. Roasting is a real foodie thing because it deepens the flavour and it helps to bring out that real chocolatey aroma and depth of flavour that we all love. So then you've got either a roasted cacao bean or a raw cacao bean. And then we want to turn that into chocolate making ingredients. So first of all, we create cacao liquor or cacao mass. So you take either the raw or roasted bean and then you process it and grind it down. And in the grinding process, it gets heated up and creates into a liquidy, liquory mass. And then you have cacao liquor. When that cools down, it turns into a solid block. If you want cacao powder or cacao butter, what you do is you take the cacao liquor or cacao mass and you press out the cacao butter, and you're left with cacao or cocoa powder or cacao or cocoa butter. Some people call it cacao, some people call it cocoa. So you've either got roasted cacao powder or cocoa powder, or you've got raw cacao powder. And there's also a third way of processing, which is called Dutch processing, where they bring in a chemical, an alkalizing chemical, and that was developed in the 1800s by a Dutch chemist. And the point of that is to soften the flavour, mellow the flavour, make it more water soluble, which makes it easier to mix into drinks, and also to lighten the colour of it. So there's 3 different ways to process it: raw, roasted, or Dutch processed with chemicals. So basically, whether it's called cacao or whether it's called cocoa depends who you're speaking to, which country you're in. It's essentially the same thing. Bear in mind that some people will refer to the raw stuff as cacao and the cooked stuff as cocoa. It really depends which brand you're looking at. It really depends who you're talking to or which country you're in. So I don't know if we are ever going to dispel the confusion about it, but what we can do is understand that there is a difference whether you want it raw, whether you want it roasted, or whether you want it Dutch processed with chemicals. So the best thing to do is decide whether you want it raw, roasted, or Dutch processed. And if you want it raw, just look out for something that says raw cacao. If you want it roasted, then look for something that says naturally processed. So that will mean it hasn't been chemically treated. Naturally processed, and it's either going to be called cocoa or cacao. Some companies write cacao/cocoa to dispel the confusion. If you want it Dutch processed, then a lot of the really generic, mass-produced commercial brands will be Dutch processed. So I hope that this helps you understand a little bit more about the whole process. Thanks for tuning in. If you resonate with what you hear here, please do come and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out my website, kindearth.net, and come and check out some of my chocolate making recipes made simple. Bye for now.